Hey everyone, welcome to He's Not Wrong. I'm your host, Chad D. And this episode has been a long time coming. I've wrestled with when and how to really sit. Originally, I was sent this book, Original Sin by Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson, to read and review here on He's Not Wrong. So that's still the plan. But since receiving this book, I've delayed this episode for several reasons. The first reason is personal and political. Joe Biden was recently diagnosed with a very aggressive form of prostate cancer. And when I got that news, it gave me pause because this is a man who championed cancer research and lost his son to a rare form of the disease. And he's also the central figure of this episode. So I had to sit with that. And here's where I landed. I can criticize Biden's leadership and his decisions while still hoping for his recovery. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. We are in a tough spot because of his choices, and I'll talk about that. But I also want him to get well. That's most important. The second reason for the delay in this episode is the controversy surrounding this book. Some say that it distracts from the need to cover Trump, and others say that we should leave Biden alone. And some are even arguing that Jake Tapper should have broken this story earlier. So I want to bring back that idea of mutual exclusivity because it doesn't apply here either. We can examine what went wrong in Biden's presidency and in Biden's campaign while still holding Trump accountable for the chaos and for the cruelty that he continues to bring into our lives. I've made it very clear. I do not support Trump, but I also believe that we need to confront what the Democratic Party did in 2024, because like it or not, they helped put Trump back in the White House. You can blame Jake Tapper if you want, but the truth is the Democratic establishment played a role in this outcome, full stop. So before we dive into the book, there's another point that I want to make, and it's about Tapper and Thompson's reporting. Of the 200 interviews conducted for Original Sin, nearly all of them were people close to the White House, to the campaign, or to Biden himself. And almost none of them were willing to go on the record until after the election occurred. You can speculate on their reasons why, but most feared backlash if they spoke up too soon. And that brings me to my final point before we get started, and that's journalistic integrity. If Tapper and Thompson had published hearsay or half-formed stories without real reporting, without confirmation, without doing the work, that would have made them no better than the far-right media machine that operates on vibes and outrage and fake news. But they didn't do that. They waited, they verified, they delivered the facts, and whether you like the outcome or not, the method matters. Because if they hadn't done it the right way, the damage to journalism would have been enormous. So let's dive into Original Sin. President Biden's decline, its cover-up, and his disastrous choice to run again. The book lays out a damning case that Joe Biden's cognitive and physical decline, combined with a deliberate effort by those closest to him to hide the truth, helped lead a failed 2024 re-election campaign, which ultimately cleared the path for Donald Trump to return to the White House. So in this episode, we're going to unpack what the book says, key revelations, controversies. We're going to look at how Biden's inner circle protected him from criticism, why the Democratic Party stood by him despite serious concerns, and what the fallout from 2024 means for the future of American politics. We're also going to talk about the timing of the book's release, why investigative reporting like this matters, especially in a time when public trust in the media is extremely low, and the hard lessons Democrats need to learn from what happened. So as I said, I was sent an early copy of this book to read and examine and to react to, not just summarize the facts, but to explore the deeper implications of what Tapper and Thompson uncovered in their investigation. No matter where you fall politically, this story matters. So let me say this very clearly. Holding the Democratic Party accountable does not excuse the hatred, the cruelty, and the extremism that we continue to see from Republicans. This isn't about choosing one party to protect, it's about being honest. One of the central themes of this book is that ignoring or downplaying a leader's flaws doesn't actually protect democracy, it weakens it. And when one side covers up the truth, it often empowers the other side to take advantage. So let's take a quick look at an overview of Original Sin and why it's generating so much buzz. So this book was officially released on May 20th, about a week ago. It's based on more than 200 interviews with sources from within Biden's White House, his campaign, and the broader Democratic establishment. The title comes from what the authors describe as Biden's original sin, which was his decision to run for re-election despite serious signs of decline. According to Tapper and Thompson, that choice triggered a campaign built on, as they put it, gaslighting and denial, one that not only failed to inspire voters but actively misled them about Biden's fitness to lead. They argue that this deception directly contributed to Trump's win in 2024. So this isn't just a campaign post-mortem. It's controversial for several reasons. First, the subject matter is explosive. A president's team allegedly covering up his mental and physical decline. That alone raises serious questions about transparency and honesty at the highest levels of power. Second, there's the timing. Critics have asked, why are we just now hearing about this after the election? Some believe that Tapper, as a high-profile news anchor, could have done more to alert the public if he knew how bad things actually were. But as smart as they are, Tapper and Thompson anticipated this backlash. In interviews, Tapper explained that many of their sources, as we talked about, refused to go on the record until after the election. Before November, those inside Biden's camp repeatedly insisted that he's fine. And it wasn't until after the votes were counted that people started to finally speak candidly. The authors claim they did cover concerns about Biden's age in real time, but it took confirmation and details from insiders post-election to fully understand how severe things were behind the scenes. Third, the release of the book itself, so soon after Biden left office, has drawn sharp pushback from his allies and family. Biden's White House called the book a smear job. A spokesperson for Biden dismissed it as a cash grab, challenging the authors to point to any moment when Biden wasn't able to fulfill his duties as president. His granddaughter, Naomi Biden, went even further, calling the book a bunch of unoriginal, uninspired lies written by irresponsible, self-promoting journalists out to make a quick buck. Hearing those words, we know that they're harsh, but they reflect just how sensitive and high stakes this conversation is. Still, Tapper and Thompson are standing by their reporting, and many in the media are backing them. Outlets like the New York Times, the Washington Post, and The Guardian have all given the book very strong reviews. The Guardian even went as far as describing it as a scathing account of a president cocooned from reality. Like it or not, Original Sin, it has touched a nerve. So that's the context. A political blockbuster book alleging a cover-up at the highest levels, landing just months after an election loss, and raising serious questions about who knew what and when. So now we need to get into the core of the book. What did Biden's decline actually look like, and how was it kept from the American people for as long as they hid it? One of the core revelations in Original Sin is just how deeply Joe Biden's cognitive and physical health declined during his presidency, and how early the signs began to show. Biden was already the oldest sitting U.S. president in U.S. history. And according to the book, his gradual decline was apparent by late 2022. Now, Biden has always had a reputation for gaffes and verbal missteps, but this was different. By the end of 2022, he reportedly began forgetting the names of longtime advisors and friends, people that he had known for decades. One moment stands out in particular. In December 2022, during a meeting, Biden apparently couldn't recall the name of his own national security advisor, Jake Sullivan. And that wasn't an isolated incident either. The book details how Biden would sometimes stare blankly at people he'd known for years or become disoriented when tired. Physically, the decline was just as visible behind closed doors. By 2023, according to Tapper and Thompson, Biden's work days were significantly shortened. His public appearances became more scripted and infrequent. Even basic logistics like walking became a concern. The campaign reportedly had a contingency discussion about using a wheelchair if Biden was reelected. His doctor had warned that a serious fall could make a wheelchair necessary for recovery. And yes, Biden did trip publicly, most memorably at the Air Force Academy graduation in 2023. But while the public saw a stumble, insiders were worried about something far more serious. Medical reports noted a stiffened gait due to a spinal wear and tear, but no significant interventions followed. Instead, his team adapted. One tactic included using slow motion B-roll to make his walking pace seem less obviously slow in campaign videos. In other words, they tried to mask what was happening in front of the public eye. One of the most jarring moments in the book involves George Clooney, a longtime Biden supporter and friend. At a Hollywood fundraiser that Clooney was hosting, Biden reportedly greeted Clooney with a vacant expression, seemingly not recognizing him. That startled Clooney so much that he later wrote a private letter and eventually published a public op-ed in the New York Times urging President Biden not to run for re-election. So we need to let that sink in. A close ally went public pleading with the president to step aside. We'll talk more about how Biden's team responded or didn't to those warnings. But this moment with Clooney illustrates how visible the decline had become to those around him. So to be fair, Original Sin doesn't ignore Biden's accomplishments. The book acknowledges major legislative wins, his leadership during global crises like Ukraine, and his reputation as a decent man with decades of public service. And that's part of what makes this all so painful. According to the authors, Biden's refusal or inability to face his own limitations led to what many call a political catastrophe. So with Biden visibly struggling behind the scenes, what did his team do about it? This brings up another major theme of the book, the cover-up orchestrated by his inner circle. Tapper and Thompson describe Biden's closest aides and family as insular and fiercely loyal, so much that they compare the group to an authoritarian politburo, hard to say, a small, tightly controlled leadership circle. It included longtime advisors like Mike Donnellan, Steve Ricchetti, as well as trusted confidants like Jill Biden and former Chief of Staff Ron Klain. Together, this group acted as Biden's gatekeepers, shielding him not just from the public, but sometimes from reality. Cabinet members reportedly struggled to get direct access to the president. One official described the setup like this: you brief us and we'll brief him. Some cabinet secretaries went months without a one-on-one meeting with the president, a stark contrast from the earlier days of Biden's presidency. So why did his team do this? Original Sin suggests a mix of motives: protectiveness, denial, and political self-interest. They wanted to keep Biden confident, telling him that his age was becoming a liability or that voters were noticing, risked upsetting him or undermining morale. More cynically, the book implies that some of Biden's inner circle wanted to cling to power. If Biden stepped aside, so might their influence. One excerpt captures the attitude well. They were not willing to cede power and insisted to each other that Biden was still sharp, still capable. It was classic bunker mentality, and for a while it worked. At least it worked inside the bubble that they found themselves in. Biden himself believed that he could handle another term. After the Democrats performed better than expected in 2022 midterms, holding the Senate and minimizing House losses, he took it as a green light to run again, and First Lady Joe Biden strongly supported his decision. Within that tight circle, there was real confidence. We've got this. Any suggestion otherwise was seen as disloyal. And there is more than just loyalty at play. Original Sin reveals an emotional undercurrent to Biden's political instincts. Back in 2016, after the death of his son Beau, Biden considered running for president, but Barack Obama quietly signaled support for Hillary Clinton. And Biden never forgot that. According to the book, that moment fostered an us versus them mentality among Biden loyalists. So by 2024, questioning Biden's ability to run wasn't just a strategic concern, it was seen as betrayal. This dynamic made it incredibly hard for even top Democrats outside the inner circle to raise alarms. Anyone who expressed doubt was quickly shut out or branded as disloyal. The result? According to Tapper, the White House wasn't just hiding the truth from the public. They were misleading their own cabinet, staff, members of Congress, and even major donors. That's how tightly controlled the messaging around Biden was. And then came the breaking point, the first and only Biden debate of 2024. According to Original Sin, that night was when the cover-up finally collapsed in plain sight. And we're going to walk through that moment next because it's central to everything else that followed. Throughout 2023 and into early 2024, despite growing whispers in Washington about President Biden's age and fitness, the Democratic Party maintained a united message. Biden would be the nominee. No serious primary challenge would be considered. Public polling consistently showed that voters, including many Democrats, were uneasy about his age. But the party line remained firm. Joe Biden is fine. Joe can do the job. So by the summer of 2024, the stage was set. Biden versus Trump round 2. The first debate, hosted by CNN on June 27th in Atlanta, was the moment that Americans could finally see the two candidates go head-to-head. And what they saw that night quite literally changed everything. From the moment that Biden walked onto that stage, something felt off. He appeared, in the words of Politico, pale, hoarse, and feeble. Gone was the steady, forceful incumbent who had taken the debate stage in 2020. In his very first response, Biden stumbled, not physically, but verbally. His answer rambled and it drifted, and it was so alarming. Jake Tapper, who was one of the moderators of that debate, reportedly typed "holy smokes" onto his iPad to the control room, stunned by what he was witnessing. Millions of Americans watching at home had the same exact reaction. And even Trump, who was rarely speechless, looked surprised. And at one point, he jabbed, "I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence, and I don't think he did either." It was a brutal line, and unfortunately for Democrats, it landed. Biden did find his footing a bit as the debate continued, but the damage had already been done. The carefully managed image of Joe Biden as aged but capable was shattered that night. And you could almost feel Democrats across the country collectively wince in real time. Before the debate, Biden's team had waved off the concerns as media hype or partisan noise. After the debate, that confidence evaporated. Panic set in. Denial followed. And the public's faith in Biden's ability to stand up to Trump was gone. And so was his inner circle's ability to pretend everything was fine, because it clearly wasn't. I, for one, remember exactly where I was on June 27th, 2024, the night of that debate. I was in New York City, And the energy and excitement around that first presidential debate was absolutely electric. I researched many places through articles about the best place to watch the debate in the city. And many places were hosting events and parties, live viewings, etc. So my boyfriend and I decided to meet up with a friend at a theater in Bushwick. It had a bar and a theater that was going to live stream the debate. Everyone there was so excited, but that excitement only lasted so long because the second that Biden opened his mouth, the energy in that theater was visibly sucked out of it. Silence. Everyone utterly shocked, secondhand embarrassment. You name it, we felt it. What started as an excited evening became one that drugged on and couldn't end fast enough. Towards the end of that debate, people were yelling at Biden to wrap it up. I never thought that that is how that night was going to end. And at the end of the debate, I remember saying, Trump just won the election. It was evident to me that night that it wasn't only a matter of if, but when he was going to drop out of the race. It was obvious that the wheels of change were in motion. In the immediate aftermath of Biden's debate performance, the before and after effect was undeniable. Before June 27th, Democratic leaders publicly expressed confidence in his candidacy. After June 27th, panic started to spread across the party. As Politico put it, the trajectory of the campaign changed almost instantly once the public saw Biden's stark decline on stage. The narrative that he was old but still capable collapsed in real time. Biden himself seemed to grasp the fallout. Just one day later, at a rally in Raleigh, North Carolina, he tried to do damage control to the best of his ability, speaking to the crowd. He admitted, "I don't debate as well as I used to, but I know what I do know. I know how to tell the truth." He added, "I know I'm not a young man." These comments made headlines. While the goal was to reassure, "I may be slow, but I'm honest," for many it only confirmed what the entire country had just collectively witnessed. The president was visibly struggling. From that point forward, every Biden appearance was scrutinized. Democrats held their breath each time he opened his mouth, praying that he could get through it without another misstep or sign of confusion. It was a tense and often at times grueling stretch of the campaign, and things just kept getting worse. In early July, Biden sat for a televised interview in which he acknowledged having a bad night at the debate, but he insisted that he was still fit to lead, going so far as to say only the Lord Almighty could convince him to drop out. But the talking points, they didn't land. Within days, Democratic officials began breaking ranks. First with a few scattered voices in Congress, and then came the flood. From progressives to centrists, a cascade of Democratic leaders and lawmakers and strategists began calling publicly and privately for Biden to step aside. All of this was unprecedented. A sitting president being effectively pushed out by his own reelection campaign by members of his own party in the middle of an election year. Outside events added even more chaos, as if scripted. A failed assassination attempt on Donald Trump briefly took over the headlines during this period, giving him a very public surge of sympathy. But he quickly seized on the moment to rally his base and dominate the news cycles. Meanwhile, at the same time, Biden tested positive for COVID-19, forcing him to isolate during a critical stretch when he desperately needed to be visible and vocal. Everything that could go wrong for Joe Biden did. And then the breaking point came on July 21st, just 24 days after that debate. Facing mounting pressure and political reality, President Joe Biden announced that he was ending his reelection campaign and endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris as the Democratic nominee. It was, in all intents and purposes, a political earthquake, something the country has not seen in over half a century. In his statement, Biden wrote that while he had fully intended to run, he now believed that it was in the best interest of his party and the country to step down. He committed to finishing his term and he threw his full support behind Harris. The moment marked the end of a very turbulent chapter, and it all happened in just 4 weeks. 4 weeks from that Atlanta debate to Biden stepping aside. In that short time, the Democratic Party went from confidently coasting toward a rematch with Trump to navigating completely uncharted territory with a new Democratic nominee. In hindsight, many saw it coming. Biden's collapse, some said, felt inevitable. One Democratic strategist compared it to a Greek tragedy, where the protagonist's attempt to avoid fate is precisely what causes it. Tapper and Thompson echo that idea. They write, in Greek tragedy, the protagonist's effort to avoid his fate is what seals his fate. In 2024, American politics became a Greek tragedy. Biden's original sin, choosing to run again despite clear signs he shouldn't, is what ultimately led to the very outcome Democrats feared most, a second Trump presidency. The authors argue that the collapse we saw on June 27th wasn't some freak accident. It was, in their words, the natural result of an 81-year-old man whose faculties had been diminishing for years. That night didn't derail the train. It simply made the derailment visible to everyone. Now we need to talk about what comes next and what went right. The role of Kamala Harris in a moment of unprecedented political crisis. When President Biden withdrew and passed the baton to Vice President Kamala Harris, it launched one of the most extraordinary and challenging chapters of her political career, with just over 3 months until the election day. Vice President Harris had to pivot from running mate to presidential nominee literally overnight. It was a near impossible situation, but by most accounts, Harris navigated the transition with composure, resilience, and loyalty. From the very beginning, she made clear that she would honor Biden's legacy even as she stepped forward to lead. On July 22nd, 2024, just one day after Biden's announcement, Harris spoke at a previously scheduled White House event. Instead of distancing herself from the chaos or pivoting to her own campaign, she used that moment to praise Biden's record. She called his accomplishments unmatched in modern history and highlighted his integrity, saying, "Our president, Joe Biden, fights for the American people, and we are deeply, deeply grateful for his service." It was a powerful statement of respect and a signal to the party that she would not throw Joe Biden under the bus. But behind the scenes, some of her allies may have been frustrated, and understandably so. Biden's insistence on running had left the party in a near extreme, awful position. Harris understood the stakes. Creating distance from Biden too abruptly could fracture party unity when it was needed the most. Instead, she walked a very delicate line, embracing Biden's achievements while positioning herself as a fresh start. When she formally accepted the nomination, Harris emphasized that she intended to earn it in her own right, signaling both continuity and renewal. Her message was forward-looking. She leaned into her own generational contrast with Biden and Trump, offering voters a new chapter, a new voice, and a new energy. At a time when the Democratic Party was reeling, Harris symbolized the future, a stark and intentional contrast to the chaos of recent weeks. But her grace didn't end with the campaign. After losing in the November 2024 election to Donald Trump, Harris delivered a concession speech that was widely praised for its patriotism and poise. She urged her supporters not to despair and reminded the country that accepting the outcome of an election is foundational to American democracy. In a powerful gesture, she even called Trump to offer support in ensuring a peaceful transition of power, directly contrasting the behavior of Trump after the 2020 election. Her message was clear. While the loss stung, democracy must come first. It was a moment that reminded many Americans what leadership in defeat can look like. At a time of division and distrust, Harris modeled dignity, unity, respect for democratic norms. Given the circumstances she inherited, her conduct stood out. She didn't win the presidency, but she left the campaign with her own reputation intact and in many ways enhanced. As Original Sin makes clear, Harris was thrust into a position not because of normal primary processes, but because the process had essentially collapsed, which leads us to one of the central lessons in the book: the importance and fragility of a healthy, functioning primary system. The Democratic Party's failure to embrace that process in 2024 had consequences, and it's worth unpacking how and why that happened. One of the broader themes explored in the book, Original Sin, is the critical importance of a robust primary process and what happens when that process is sidelined or manipulated. Historically, incumbent presidents rarely face serious primary challenges, and party leaders tend to fall in line behind them. In 2024, Democratic Party officials followed that script with Joe Biden. Despite widespread private concerns about his age and his stamina, there were near unanimous effort to shield him from any serious inter-party contest. The book details just how far this went. When a few within the party floated the idea of an alternative nominee, they were quickly shut down. Biden's former 1988 campaign manager, Bill Daley, quietly approached several Democratic governors in 2023 to consider running. Not one of them took the bait. No one wanted to challenge the White House. Then came Rep. Dean Phillips of Minnesota, who said out loud what many were whispering: that Biden was too old to win and that Democrats needed a next generation candidate. Phillips launched a long shot campaign in late 2023. The Democratic Party's response? They changed the rules. The DNC restructured the primary calendar to make South Carolina, the state that saved Biden's 2020 campaign, the first contest. By bypassing the traditional Iowa and New Hampshire openers, they also refused to sponsor any primary debates. Effectively, the message was as clear as can be: we will not allow a real primary to happen. Phillips never got a national platform to make his case. He suspended his campaign after Super Tuesday with barely making a ripple in the primary process and ultimately endorsing Biden. At that time, party insiders defended these moves as necessary to preserve unity and avoid weakening Biden before the general election. It was a classic short-term strategy: protect the incumbent, project strength, avoid internal drama, and in doing so, they bypassed a crucial democratic process. Primaries exist to pressure test candidates, to expose vulnerabilities early, and to allow the party to adapt. By avoiding that scrutiny, Democrats robbed themselves of the opportunity to address Biden's decline before it was too late. The pressure testing finally came, but it wasn't in a primary. It came on a national debate stage in front of millions of voters, with Donald Trump standing across from Biden. The cost of suppressing a primary challenge became painfully clear. And Original Sin makes that case that a real primary, while politically messy, might have surfaced Biden's limitations earlier, possibly leading to a more timely transition or an alternative nominee who had undergone the proper vetting. And instead, the party created a fragile illusion of unity and readiness, which crumbled under the weight of reality in the general election. There was also a procedural messiness that many voters didn't fully grasp. After Biden dropped out and Vice President Harris became the presumptive nominee, but without a formal primary win or delegate path, the DNC had to scramble to put the legal and procedural pieces in place to make her nomination official. Though Harris was the logical and popular successor, the optics were tricky. To some, especially critics on the right, it looked like the Democrats had installed a nominee without voter input. While that wasn't technically true, party rules allow for emergency replacements. The lack of transparency in the nomination process undermined confidence. This is where Original Sin offers an unflinching look behind that curtain. It details how key party actors, donors, strategists, senior officials, how they all tactfully agreed to stick with Biden despite serious reservations. The result was a system that looked Democratic on the surface, but was tightly stage managed behind the scenes. The lesson here is clear. Transparency and accountability in the nominating process are not just political niceties, they're structural safeguards. When the process is closed off, when dissent is silenced, and when concerns are buried, a party puts itself at risk. The Democratic Party's failure to allow even a basic airing of alternatives in 2024 didn't just harm the nominee, it hurt the entire electoral project. Tapper and Thompson pose a difficult but necessary question. What if someone with real influence had spoken up earlier? What if there had been a serious challenger who caught fire? Couldn't the 2024 meltdown have been avoided? We can't rewrite the past, but we can learn from it. And one of the clearest takeaways is this: silence is complicity. Nearly every democratic institution within the democratic ecosystem, elected officials, party leaders, donors, and many in the media, either dismissed concerns about Biden or actively discouraged discussion. Whether it was loyalty, fear, or calculation, their collective silence delayed the reckoning until it was too late. And by then, the cost wasn't just a failed campaign, it was a blow to public trust and an opportunity lost for the party and for the country. And at this point, some of you listening might be asking, okay, Biden and the Democrats clearly mishandled this, but what about Trump and the Republicans? Where's their accountability? That's an essential question, and I want to be absolutely clear again. Nothing about this critique of Biden's inner circle or the Democratic Party's choices excuses, as I said, the hate, extremism, or anti-democratic behavior coming from many corners of today's Republican Party. You can hold two truths at once. Biden's team should have been honest with the American public about his decline. And yes, Donald Trump still must be held accountable for his words and his actions and the damage his leadership continues to inflict. In fact, one of the most painful ironies that Original Sin highlights is that by hiding Biden's cognitive and physical decline, Democrats may have unintentionally made Trump's return to power more likely. Trump's narrow win in 2024 over a scrambling Harris campaign unleashed precisely the chaos his critics had warned about. This is why accountability must be a two-way street. The media should rigorously investigate whoever is in power, Democrat or Republican. That's the value of investigative journalism. In a time when media institutions are under relentless attack and dismissed as fake news, Original Sin shows us why a free press is indispensable. Without this book, many of these behind-the-scenes failures would remain hidden, and the public would lose out on a vital opportunity to learn from what happened. And it matters that these revelations didn't come from the fringe actors. Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson are seasoned in their craft. They're mainstream journalists. Their credibility gives the book's findings added weight, and it reminds us that accountability within one's own political community is not betrayal, it's integrity. It's exactly the kind of journalism we need more of if the democracy is going to survive an era of division, disinformation, and denial. And at the same time, the Republican Party must also take a hard look in the mirror. Biden's decline was real, but that doesn't validate the way many conservatives and right-wing media figures responded to it. The memes mocking dementia, the bad faith speculation about his health, none of it was rooted in concern for the country. It was cruelty for political gain. And if anything, those ugly tactics likely caused Biden's circle to close ranks even tighter, making it harder to speak the truth internally. So as I wrap up, let's say what shouldn't need to be said. Decency still matters. It's fair and sometimes necessary. We have to raise the bar because if we don't, our politics will continue to reward cruelty over competence, and no one wins in that system. Original Sin, President Biden's decline, its cover up, and his disastrous choice to run again shouldn't be looked at as just a book about what went wrong on the Democratic side in 2024. It informs us about the importance of leadership, transparency, and political responsibility. The title may be provocative, but it fits. It makes sense. Biden's original sin, choosing to run for a second term despite serious concerns, set off a chain reaction that not only cost his party the presidency, but arguably helped pave the path, as we have said, for Donald Trump to return to power. That's a hard truth, but it's one supported by the deep reporting in this book. And now Democrats are at a crossroads yet again. They must reckon with what went wrong in 2024, not to just assign blame, but to learn and to improve. That requires confronting uncomfortable realities about age and succession planning, about internal party democracy, and about the risk of insulating candidates from criticism. It means empowering truth tellers and whistleblowers, not silencing them. It means remembering that silence, especially in the face of obvious decline, is complicity. We saw the consequences of that silence in 2024. If it happens again, the results could be just as damaging. I want to highlight that Original Sin isn't just a book about a political failure. It's a reminder of the power of transparency and of journalism. The truth did come out, even if later than it should have. Investigative reporters, they did their jobs. Kamala Harris, thrust into an almost impossible situation, showed that grace, loyalty, and that competence can still exist in public service. These moments give us a reason to hope. So what do we do with all of this? First, I want to encourage you to read the book. Original Sin is compelling and it's a sobering read, one that reads like a political thriller, like I could see it becoming a movie, but it also reads as a sort of red flag. No matter where you land on the political spectrum, this book offers insight into how things went off track and what might be done to course correct. We need to use Original Sin as a way to spark conversations with friends, family, or colleagues as we head into 2026 and 2028. How do we hold leaders accountable? How do we speak hard truths without tearing each other down? For me, the central takeaway is this: democracy only works if we're honest with ourselves, with each other, and with those who we elect. In 2024, the Democratic Party tried to avoid a short-term crisis and instead created a long-term catastrophe. Let's not make that mistake again. As we head into the next election cycle, let's demand vibrant primaries, open debates, and leaders who know when it's time to pass the torch and support a new generation of leaders. Let's support a media that investigates all sides, not to create scandal, but to seek truth, just as Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson did. And with that, those are my thoughts on Original Sin by Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson. This book is compelling. As I said, it's sobering and it is a must read for everyone. It's not just a postmortem, but it is a warning. I loved reading it. I'm very appreciative that their publishing company sent me an early release copy of the book. I'm now going to hand it off to my mom to read. But with that being said, that was this episode. I wanted to give my thoughts and a review on what the takeaways should be from this book, what the book covers, and the messages that are very evident throughout it. I hope that you enjoyed this book review. So to end this episode, what am I not wrong about? That Original Sin is an amazing book and everyone must read it. I'll see you next Sunday.